Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Joe Nuxhall, My Life, Baseball, and Beyond. I'm Dennis Jansen, and delighted to be joined again by Joe Nuxhall. Joe, let's talk about, again, some of the nuances of baseball today. We talked about some of the lost etiquette from generations gone by, purpose pitches as well. You weren't afraid to come inside, and legend has it that one time you threw a wet one to Willie Mays.
Well, I guess...
The statute of limitations has expired on this.
I might as well go ahead and admit it. But really, I think most pitchers, as you go through your career and you get into the later years, will say that you begin to experiment with maybe something that will extend the career. And we had a pitcher by the name of Art Fowler in the 50s, and he did a pretty good job with the wet one, we'll call it. And he explained it to me and what you wanted to do and to throw the wet one or the spitter. So I was experimenting with it, and we're playing in San Francisco, and Johnny Edwards, this is after I came back in '62, John Edwards was our catcher, and a lot of folks have heard me tell this story. And now I've experimented with my spitball, and I decided I got it down pretty good. So I had Willie Mays, who was a great guy. I mean, Willie's a first-class person. And we always had a lot of fun with Willie. I'd always stare at him. When he came up to the plate, I'd just stand there and I'd stare at him like I was going to drill him, like that. So anyway, I was 0-2. And so Edwards, he's hanging down the signs. He puts down 1. Which normally what we'd do is try to throw him hard inside and then go away from him. So he puts down 2, and I shake that off. He puts down 3, I shake that off. He wiggles, which is a changeup. I shake that off. He starts over, puts down 1, shake it off, puts down 2, shakes it off, time out. And here he comes, John. I said, what in the world do you want to throw here? I said, well, throw him the spitter. Said, okay. So he goes back and he goes through signs. We know we're going to throw a spitball. So like I like to describe it, when you spitball, you wet your fingers and you grab the ball off the seams. You don't have any seams. And really the pitch will tumble. You throw it not as hard as your fastball, but it tumbles. So now I got that rascal, and again, I like to describe it that I had so much moisture, we'll call it, on my fingers, that I had to hold the ball up like this, because if I turn it over like this, it would slip out of my fingers. So anyway, now Willie's up there hitting, and I wind up and I throw that rascal, and it comes in just about belt high, maybe a little more below belt high, and now Willie, excuse me, starts to swing at it, and it gets right out about in front of the plate, and the bottom falls out of it. And Willie swings, and he swings down on it, and he fouls it off. So now he's out of the batter's box, and he's getting a handful of dirt, and he's looking out at the mound. I got a funny little grin on my face, and Willie looks at me, and I look at him, and I got this grin on, and he yells at me. Willie had kind of a high-pitched voice. He said, hey, Joe, what the hell was that? And I cracked up. Then I had to turn my back on him. So I threw that one, and then I had another one. We're playing the Dodgers here at Crosley Field, and there was second and third, and 1 out. And Al Ferrara, big right-handed power hitter for the Dodgers, was scheduled to hit. And Hutch was the manager, and so Hutch came out and asked me what I wanted to do. The next batter up was Lou Johnson, and Lou is from Lexington, Kentucky. So now I'm got my new pitch in my head, my spitball. So I said, let's walk Ferrara, load the bases, set up the double play. And now I'm talking to myself for thinking, I said, and then I'll get Lou Johnson, I'll throw him the spitball. he'll ground to short, and we'll get out of the inning with a double play. So Hutch goes back to the dugout, and Lou steps in there, and I load that sucker up, and he hit it off the scoreboard in left center field and all cleared the bases. So that's the last spitball I ever threw. But one of the great spitball stories that I can recall was Preacher Rowe, who pitched for the Brooklyn Dodgers, and he lived by it as far as we were concerned. But we could never catch him doing it. You know, usually you could kind of surmise how, like Gaylord Perry, we always felt that how he got his, he was always, I don't know if you remember Gaylord pitching, but he was always fooling with his hat. And he would either rub down the back of his neck or he'd come across and you'd see his ear flip. And if you saw the ear flip, we surmised that's where he got it, from Vaseline or whatever he might have had. But anyway, Preacher Rowe, we could never figure out where in the devil he got this. So Pee Wee Reese, you know, one time became the TV guy with, I think, Frank McCormick or I forget exactly who it was, for the Reds. And then, of course, Pee Wee worked for Louisville Slugger, Hilrich and Brasby, and for years. So one day we were talking to Pee Wee, and I said, Pee Wee, how did Preacher Rowe get the spitball? He says, you won't believe this, guys. I forget, there was 3 or 4 of us talking. He says, you won't believe this. He said, Preacher had his teeth were separated right here, and said whenever he went to his hat bill, he was left-handed, wherever he went to his hat bill, he would just say, and he could hit that spot right here on the palm of his hand, and until when he started his windup, all he did was just fold his hands, and he got it, and that's how he got the spitter. Jim Maloney, I know a lot of people have heard the story I tell about them, but this is a true story. It happened in San Francisco. Jim and Gaylord Perry were going to hook up this afternoon, and Dave Bristol was our manager. So Dave got Jim aside and he said, look, Gaylord Perry's pitching for the Giants, and he's going to throw 80% spitballs. And he said, I want you to throw yours. Well, now Maloney, I mean, he got it up there in the high 90s, and he had a spitball, I mean, rolled off the table. So Jim says, no, I don't have command of it. He said, I don't want to do it. And Dave kept prodding him. He said, look, Perry's going to throw it. He said, I want you to. So finally, Dave convinced him to throw it, but Maloney said, look, I'll tell you what I'll do. He says, and Maloney could swing the bat. He was a good hitting pitcher. So he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. He says, when I get up to the plate, if he throws me a spitball, then the war is on. So lo and behold, Jim gets up there, and here they come. Boom. He strikes Maloney out, and now the war is on. And Maloney starts throwing those suckers about 92 mile an hour, and they're falling off the table. And Herman Franks is the manager of the Giants. And I don't recall the umpire, but anyway, he kept yelling at the umpire, he's throwing a spitter. And the umpire's paying no attention. He said, there's another one. And what was that? And that was the way the scenario went. So finally, I guess it was after maybe 3 or 4 innings, Franks is still yelling, you know, and Perry's out there throwing his, and the umpire knew that, I guess. And so finally, Frank says, there's another spitter, and it goes on, and finally Herman says, what was that? And the umpire jerks his mask off, and he walks over toward the dugout, and he says, looked at Herman, he said, Herman, I don't know what it was, but it's the best one I ever saw. I'll never forget that as long as I live. The best one I ever saw. But there's a story about Sparky. Some people might remember that when we're in Chicago with Phil Regan, who was a closer for the Cubs back in the 70s. And Ed Vargo was the umpire, if I'm not mistaken, behind the home plate. And Sparky questioned the fact that Regan was throwing the spitball. So we kept yelling at Ed, so Ed says, and Sparky went out to say, he's throwing us better. So Ed said, okay, so he gets a towel. And he goes out to the mound, and he takes Reagan's hat off and wipes the bill of it, wipes the inside, the back of it, wipes his arms, wipes his forehead, his face, his neck. And he said, you satisfied, Spark? And Spark said, okay. So Sparky comes back to the dugout. Vargo back behind the plate. What do you think the first pitch was? He threw.
Spinner.
Thank you. Sparky said, I give. And then there was, Don Sutton, who threw the scratch ball. And that one afternoon in the Riverfront, they collected balls, and I think they had 8 or 10 of those balls where they were scratched. And Sutton, I don't know how he had, were sandpaper or what, but or one of the eyelets on his glove. They had all kind of tricks.
Speaking of former Los Angeles or Brooklyn Dodgers, let's visit for a moment the transition, the breaking of the color line with Jackie Robinson coming to baseball. Obviously, to the betterment of the game. And how did you view that? You obviously lived through that. You played against, and you saw Satchel Paige pitch, apparently, when you were younger.
Well, you got to take your hat off to Jackie Robinson. I think it was embarrassing. It should have been for the white folks, the people that caused this problem, because Jackie was, I knew him, talked to him, and he was a first-class gentleman. And I think baseball fans back in those days, if they realized the way they went about things and treating the color barrier, I think should be a bit embarrassed, in all honesty. Jack was an excellent player. And, one thing about Jack, you hate to get him on base because he'd drive you up a wall. I mean, he was so quick. I don't think speed-wise he was extremely fast, but his first moves were just quick as a dickens. And you get him on first base or second base, and he'd drive you crazy because he never stood still. He'd be juggling back and forth, and you'd throw over there and wouldn't even come close to getting him. And I always remember in Brooklyn one afternoon, I was pitching against the Dodgers, and I had Jack 0-2. And, of course, basically my 2 pitches were a fastball and a slider. And I assumed that on this particular pitch, Jack was looking for a slider, and I threw a fastball, and he fouled the thing off over the Dodger dugout and hit a guy right there, an absolute bullet. I don't know why that sticks in my mind, but I always remember that. But Jackie, when I look back on what he went through, boy, I don't think there's a lot of people in the world could have put up with that the way Jack did. And our hats are off to Jackie Robinson, getting the color barrier broken. And I think Happy Chandler, being from Kentucky and the strong points he took with it, I think were very rewarding for Mr. Chandler. He was a great individual.
One of baseball's great ambassadors was one of your champions, Waite Hoyt. Tell us about Waite. When did you first meet him? What kind of influence did he exert on your career and life?
Well, Waite was, he was really an interesting man to talk to. I used to really get a kick out of him talking about some of his old teammates, particularly Babe Ruth and Joe Dugan, I think, and some of the other individuals. But as far as Waite here, when we look back on all this, between Waite and myself, as far as baseball goes, we have did the radio broadcast for over 60 years. I think Waite was there 25 and myself 38. So that's something that we're proud of. But Waite, I always say his forte was telling stories. He was the grand champion at rain delays. I mean, that guy, he was amazing how he could sit up there for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and just cover a rain delay with no problems whatsoever. The thing that I always liked about Waite, anytime he was around and I could go like to banquets or something, I would go because he could tell the same stories and you still, you know, really, they were funny. But the thing about Wade, he had that little laugh of his, you know, and you had to laugh at his little laugh before you laughed at the story. But as far as anything discussing pitching or anything, we never did that, and that might be something I learned from Wade, because that's something that I've never tried to do since, you know, after I stopped playing, that, you know, a pitching coach has his duties, and for someone else to walk up to you and say, well, Denny, look, you know, get your arm's not up, that type thing. And then the Don Gullett comes and said, well, hey, you're fine, you know, that type thing. So that's something I've never really tried to do. And if I ever did, I would always go to the pitching coach, in this case, Don Gullett, and tell him, I said, Don, I mentioned this to, you know, whoever it might be, and what do you think? And but I never did anything like that unless I told Don or the skipper. But it, you know, the big thing was selling the ball club, you know, and selling yourself in a sense, I guess you would say. And all these guys were a part of that. You could always see them around in the wintertime. And again, as we mentioned, I don't think there's any player in town that I know of from the current ball club, which, again, I understand.
You certainly weren't among even the first to do it, but you were among a group, an early group, that made the transition from baseball into broadcasting. First of all, how did you know that your career was over? Everybody wants one more season, but you had to come to grips with that, and then finding work. How did that evolve?
Well, it was just, I guess Wade was a part of it, without a doubt. I think Wade was with the ball club 25 years, I think that's right. And when the Burger Brewing Company lost the rights and Wiedemann took it over, Claude Sullivan, I think, went to work with Wade, and then Wade retired and Jim McIntyre came on. And I guess the feeling was that they needed baseball connected with the broadcast. And at that time, it was kind of interesting. I'd come back from San Diego after a couple of months out there, and did well. And then the next year we did better. And that winter, we bought a golf service station in Hamilton, and WMOH radio, which did all of Miami University sports. Ray Motley. They came down to the service station and asked if we would like to buy some advertising on the air, and I said, well, I'm not sure. Come back in a few days and we'll discuss it. Well, instead of coming back to discuss buying some advertising, they came back. Lee Moore, Monk Moore, we called him, and a salesman came. And said, Joe, would you be interested in doing Miami basketball? I said, doing what? He said, doing Miami basketball. And I said, well, what are you talking about? What do you want me to do? He said, play-by-play. I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, I have enough problems answering questions in an interview, and you want me to do that? He says, yeah, would you do it? I said, hey, I'll try anything once, because I really like basketball and I love Miami University. So he said, okay. I said, let's go. We got to go sell it. So I always remember we went to Coca-Cola, Conn's Meats, and Wayne Dairy in Richmond, Indiana. And we sold it. And so we started doing Miami basketball. And it was a lot of fun. Dick Schreider and Darrell Hedrick and Tates Locks were the coaches up there at the time, and Charlie Coles was on the team, who was a coach up at Oxford, and it was the Redskins then. And
still is to many people.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess when it all is said and done, it's now the Red Hawks. But anyway. we were doing Miami basketball and really enjoyed it. I always remember a deal that Miami was playing in Toledo, the Rockets, and they had a player by the name of Charlie Dinkins. Miami did. I think he was a local kid and a good player. And it's about 15 seconds left in the game, and Miami's down a point. And they have the ball out under their own basket. So I'm up there, Miami with the ball, 15 seconds to go, and they down one to the Rockets. They have it the left side of the basket, blah, blah, blah. So they throw it in, and I forget, it goes to somebody else and then to Dinkins. And now Dinkins is at the left baseline, and I'm looking at the clock, and now there's 10 seconds. And he's dribbling around, and now there's 5 seconds. And now there's 3 seconds. And I said, shoot the damn thing. I'll never forget that. I was embarrassed. But anyway, that was a lot of fun. John Brickles was the athletic director, if I remember correctly, and it was just a lot of fun. So one day they approached me, Wiedemann, when Wiedemann took over, said, asked if I'd be interested. And I said, back in those days, when your career started looking like it was coming to an end, you had to think of the future. So what an opportunity this was for the future. And I said, yeah. So we made a deal, but we were going to keep it quiet until spring training. So I went through spring training that particular year, 1967, and in all honesty, I was ready to pitch, but we knew that I was going to retire and go to the radio booth. So, gosh, about 10 days, I don't recall the exact time, prior to the announcement, the only left-hander we had, Ted Davidson, with any experience, he was shot by his wife in a bar in Tampa. So Dave Bristol was the manager, and I went into Dave and I said, Dave, Teddy's gone for the year. And I said, you don't have any one left-handed pitcher with any experience. I said, I'd be happy to call this off. So he said, well, I appreciate it, Joe. And he said, let's go see Mr. Housen. And that was Mr. Housen's first year as the general manager of the Reds. So we went in to see Mr. Housen and told him, what we would do. And he said, would you want to go to Detroit or Philadelphia? I said, what? Would you want to? And said, no way. So that finalized me going to the booth. But the point is, that's how sharp he is, or was, Mr. Housen. What he could have done is traded me to either one of those ball clubs, and now I am their responsibility, and he would have got whatever player might have been. So, that's why the Big Red Machine basically was born, when you think about it.
Well, you think of the marriage that led to with Marty Brennaman, and just what a successful and wonderfully warm collaboration that was and has been.
Well, that's true, and there's time spent with Claude Sullivan and Jim McIntyre were extremely valuable in the outset, and then of course working with Al Michaels for the 3 years was outstanding. And a little story about Al, we went to Venezuela to play an exhibition series. I think it was against the Pirates, and there's a mountain there called Mount Avila, if I'm not mistaken, and it has a tram that goes up. And when you get up there, you can see the Pacific Ocean, and you look out over the whole city of Caracas. So we decided one afternoon that we're going to take the tram ride. That'd be something to see. So we're going up there, and now we start off, we're about maybe 10 feet, 12 feet off the ground. And now you start up that tram, and now all of a sudden the separation gets bigger and bigger, taller and taller. So we get to this one pylon, I guess what you would call it, and we look out to the right, and there's a bunch of Boy Scouts camping. And we're going to stop and pick them up. And Al and I are standing in the back of the cable car, and we're holding on to a railing, and they stop, and that that thing starts rocking, and Al grabs my hand. He says, he thought we was going down. I don't forget that. But we got up there, and of course it was, as I say, it was quite a sight looking at the ocean and over the city of Caracas.
What is it like being a source of such pride, not just to Hamilton, but to a region?
Well, you know, I guess, Denny, I always, as I tell people, I look at my career as maybe you look at yours, or somebody that worked at Fisher Body for 35 years looks at his. I'm no different. It just so happens that baseball has been my life, and that's what I chose to live by, and it makes me no difference than anybody. The guys running the cameras here this morning or this afternoon. It's I like to walk down the street feeling like I'm just one of you folks, and let's go on, have fun, enjoy life. To me, and I've had some curlicues in my life, without a doubt. I admit that, and some things that I've done that I'm not proud of, but I was able to straighten them out in a sense. Something I would not talk about, but still, it taught me a lesson, I guess, and it taught me a lot of character too, I guess you would say. And I just like to treat people like I want to be treated. That's about as simple as I can put it.
You know what, it has been said that sports builds character. I would submit that, and you are living proof of this, that sports reveals character. You are a unique person, Joe, and we wish you all the best, and thank you very much for your time.
Well, this has been a joy, Denny, no question about it. And when you look at sports, I think people appreciate what sports does for not only us as adults, but as youth. And I personally, when I look at sports and I watch kids nowadays, we talk about winning and losing. I want kids that want to win, but I want them to know that that's not the end of the world if they don't. As we've always said, and I always remember Bertie Tebbet's, it's an old cliche that's been around and it's still around, is the fact that you walk into the clubhouse and you look in the mirror, and he had a full-length mirror put in Old Crosley Field. He said, if you can look yourself in the eye in that mirror and say, hey, I've done my best today, he said, that's all you can ask of it. Go on and enjoy life.
Thank you, Joe. The look of baseball today and in the future. Joe Nuxhall looks ahead when we have our next visit. Until then, for Joe Nuxhall, Dennis Jansen, goodbye, everyone.